I wanted to try something new, I wanted to try something fresh, I wanted to do some reviews on some sci-fi games. So here we are with Aspera, with a key so graciously provided by Raw Fury, who was the publisher for this game. And it's presenting itself as a planetary simulation game that combines hard science fiction and base building, as well as taking that experience planet-wide. And planet-wide it does. This is your entire map. You have the whole world of Mars to play on. This is your playground. But taking that experience planet-wide, does it have the depth to, be able to catch up with that width, so to speak? Still, though, there are similar games in this particular genre. Surviving Mars is definitely one of the games that comes to mind here. Except in Surviving Mars, you would play like one of these here squares, whereas in this game, you have the entire planet at your disposal. And as you can see, we're already well underway in the terraforming process, having to melt the poles on Mars, as well as imported some ice, etc. And on its surface, at least initially, when I started to play this game, I had a lot of fun with this. Yes, I did have a lot of fun with this, building those initial bases, connecting them all up with the hyperloops and setups, etc., etc. And we had a lot of fun with that. The story was also pretty good. However, the game does have its problems, and one of its major problems is its visibility, its resource system, and some issues with the story itself. The story itself is good. The sequence breaking, however, is not. So let's explain. Let me explain to you what I mean with those initial items, specifically the resource management as well as the visibility. So let's talk a little bit about visibility. The tutorial of the game basically tells you, okay, you have started at a building, and let's see if we can find one of them down here on the surface. It should be this one, I think, over here. Yeah, so you have this building here. It is a landing site. Oh, this is number 3. You built yourself an aluminium mine, then you build yourself a silicon mine, then a glass kiln, a steel mill with some other resources, and basically then you are set. You build yourself a maintenance depot, you build yourself some starports, as well as some factories to make sure you have enough workers, because workers will have to move resources from A to B, etc., etc., etc. And that's effectively where the tutorial ends. What the tutorial doesn't, however, tell you is that there is a lot of stuff going on in this game that is not labeled whatsoever. Allow me to illustrate. Now, you have let's say you have this particular area in the game, right? You would think by yourself, okay, these here are worker hubs. They're moving resources from A to B, and they're not moving stuff around very efficiently. How does this work? What's the issue here? Well, you can go into the traffic map mode, something that is not necessarily advertised anywhere in the game, and by itself, this doesn't really tell you all that much. This just says, okay, this particular area has a lot of traffic, or at least has a lot of sector road or a road saturation, which is fine. We can work with that. That is not an issue. What is not, however, presented is how to solve these problems. You can go ahead and say, okay, so we have some road problems. We're just going to go upgrade our roads to another sector, say back to this area. Okay, it will cost us this amount of resources, 8 of this carbon and 8 steel, which is a rather significant amount of resources, if I may add, especially in the early game. Don't look down here, it's not important right now. But yeah, that's fair. So that stuff is all fine, but this is clearly not going to improve our issues. So how do we actually fix this? Well, the game doesn't actually tell you in any way, shape, or form that you can improve this, or at least that I have seen, that you can improve this by adding additional worker hub to make sure resources are split around, effectively creating yet another tiny sector here. So as soon as this building, for instance, is done, this area will be split up in an additional sector, and it may or may not reduce load. load, which is rather curious. In addition, the game also tells you, for instance, that, hey, you want to expand. What is the best way of expanding? Well, of course, it's by building more buildings and then expanding your range. Whilst that may be the case, at least the way the game says it, basically what you would end up doing is build these worker hubs and just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and you get this sort of this system of a bunch of beads on a string sort of scenario where buildings are starting to reach out, and then you of course build your maintenance facilities so that you can have upkeep on your drones, etc., and all this stuff starts happening with roads being generated by the game, etc. That's fine, and you can totally do that. However, considering you have a limited amount of buildings that you can build per tier, this may not be the best approach. In this particular case, you would probably not want to do this. However, the game instead gives you something early on that you may not be aware of. We can go into our tech tree, and we'll talk about the tech tree a little bit more shortly, but I just want to illustrate a couple things here. So, the very first thing that we get here in the space category is additional landing sites. All right, additional landing sites. That's fair. Okay, so instead of doing the whole stuff on a string, we can just build an additional landing site and build an additional base. What the game, however, does not tell you is you can abuse this to hell and back. And by hell and back, I do mean the following. So we can build a landing site. Notice how the landing site just spawned a bunch of our core resources, which is it's water, it's chemicals, it's carbon, it's silicon, it's aluminium, and iron. And that's fine. That's fine. Okay, you can use this to have a base. There's a bunch of resources here that we use to build this. Or we just build another of these, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. You get the general idea. It's actually cheaper to expand using nothing but landing sites and randomly generating these resources, because you will never ever run out of them in this particular way. Sure, they may not have the same amount of yield as naturally occurring resources, but the sheer amount of resources that you can generate by the low cost of only 20 iron, 20 steel, a bunch of electronics, and as well as a bunch of aluminium is totally worthwhile, because you can just spam out a whole bunch of these areas and basically say, hey, I want a upgraded aluminium mine here, and off you go. You can crank out clusters of new bases extremely quickly, and then in that case you can use a hyperloop just to connect this entire area together. You will be using those hyperloops quite often. There's a whole bunch of other visual stuff. I saw that there were a lot of people on the Steam Hub complaining about the distribution of resources, as well as prioritization of resources. Now, the prioritization of resources by itself is handled in a rather interesting way. Let's say that let's find a reasonable building over here, actually. Let's take this here. Electronics factory, right? So the electronics factory needs a bunch of silicon and a bunch of aluminium, right? Okay. Well, first of all, we can set that to priority, so this building will be filled up as soon as possible. Do not hit the upgrade button below it accidentally, because then the building will become useless, and especially if you don't have the resources for it, you're completely and utterly boned. However, there is a bunch of signaling issues here, because let's say that we want to go ahead and say prioritize this, and there's another building that takes up the exact same resources, say this building over here. Which building gets priority? Now, at first glance, it's not particularly clear what's going on here. However, there are details within the game that is not really advertised anywhere, especially not in the tutorial about this particular thing. We can go down here into the allocation menu, especially what need to be there? It was silicon, right? Yeah, okay. So silicon, let's just apply 100% to electronics manufacturing, and only a lower amount to glass manufacturing. Same thing in the food department. We're just going to allocate everything towards research point, because that's the only thing that food can generate. The water allocation. Where's all the water allocation going to go? It's all going to go, of course, into food manufacturing and research points, because oxygen generation is dumb. I like to point out that this allocation system is not advertised within the game's tutorial at all at any point in time, which causes serious problems with visibility and of course, an extension of that, annoyance by the player. I actually did not discover the allocation drop down until about 20 hours into my gameplay. Yes, it went that far. There is a lot of other issues here as well. For instance, let's say here that we want to build a hyperloop, and we already built one of them, but I'm just going to go ahead and humor you there. Let's say that we want to build a hyperloop. We want to build it right here. Yeah, that's fine. And right now it tells us, okay, this hyperloop will cost us these amount of materials. We'll just prioritize this quickly to make sure that it gets built quickly, but it doesn't really matter within the grand scheme of things. Why doesn't it matter, ASpec? Well, it doesn't tell us how much it would cost for us to connect this hyperloop to a other nearby hyperloop. And that is a problem, because especially if you're early in the game, you don't know how much things are going to cost by connecting A to B. Especially if you think, oh boy, I can build a hyperloop, I've been waiting for all this time, and then the game tells you, oh, by the way, you've built your hyperloop, but now you're going to need to spend 50 steel as well as a bunch of carbon in order to connect them up together. The game doesn't tell you that, once again causing some level of frustration. But yeah, overall the game itself, as it presents itself, it is as wide as a planet, but it is shallow as the Martian Sea. The Martian Sea of which, of course, does not generate any water for your bases, because you're still clawing water out of the ground, where it can be found in its icy form, especially in the late game, where it is 26 degrees at the equator. Another thing that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like I said at first, I really liked this system, but the more I started playing it, the more and more I started to dislike it. And that's not because of the depth, it's more because of the inherent problems with the system. Let's take a look at something else as well. The story. The story is, on paper, really good. I really enjoyed it. The mystery of Mars. There is a mystery involved. You are a AI who hovers around in orbit around the planet, and you're basically looking down upon the planet with your all-seeing eye, and stuff will happen. Whether or not there is some faction-related stuff, the colonists that are down on the ground, or the mystery of Mars on its Carmine landscape. The real problem with it is that whilst the story itself is good, it is way too easy to sequence break. And what do I mean by this? There's a character in the game who I shall not name because they are introduced at some point, that is really cool, they're really fun, and then they get kicked off of the project because they did some stuff, and they basically leave. And that's fine, you know, characters come and go. However, I managed to hit a milestone that is attached to that particular character after they left. So whilst we've already had that teary goodbye, all of a sudden they're back with, oh, by the way, this little thing that you found on the ground, let's take a look here. Let's take an example. This abandoned weather station, very exciting stuff going on there. Really looking forward what else you're going to find. Whilst about 5 minutes before that, you're just like, well, we're never going to see that guy again because we had a lot of fun with it. Sad, it's time to move on. Yeah, sequence breaking is a real problem. There is other problems as well. For instance, let's talk a little bit about the combat system. The combat system is here in a terraforming game. The only reason the combat system is here is because of story requirements. Yes, there are story requirements that involve the combat system, which is fine. It's a mechanic that is focused around the game, about the story, and that's fine. I love it when story and gameplay as well as mechanics go hand in hand to create something better. However, all you do is build these little drone hives, and then you just send your drones around to somewhere else on the planet and just take them out. And this is particularly interesting because at one point in time, I was fighting another character. They were sitting around here somewhere. I don't know why they were there. It's all story related. You don't need to worry about it unless you play the game. Regardless, what happened was every single time I killed one of their bases, they would instantly manage to rebuild it, which was highly frustrating because I would send thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these drones towards this area, and every single time I would kill it, it would just instantly manage to rebuild all of their buildings without any repercussions. The real problem with that is that it would randomly start spawning mines everywhere in terms of, you know, mines you get resources out of, which you would then kill, and it would just spawn a new one. and a new one somewhere else, and a new one somewhere else. Long story short, before I knew it, the entire area looked a little bit like this, with more resources than you could possibly imagine being spread out over a gigantic area ready to be mined. Basically, the only way I could get rid of them is because I managed to kill all their southern bases, forcing them northwards into the floodplains, and then I managed to, well, drown them by using the polar ice caps. Intended mechanic? Probably not. Annoying? Absolutely. Was it a unconventional path within the story? Yes, but it doesn't mean that I should be able to break the game in that sense. But yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff there. So yeah, the tutorial, sadly a little bit lacking. Let's take a look here at the science, the hard science that it claims has. Well, overall, the hard science is definitely there. A lot of the stuff is definitely based within the confines of modern science, or at least near futurism and all that stuff. There is your classic space elevator, making Deimos collide and crash onto Mars. By the way, there's not a lot of animation about that. In order to increase the temperature on the planet. Importing nitrogen from Titan, because Mars is very defunct of nitrogen, which means that you're going to need to get it from somewhere to get a nice and balanced atmosphere. Creating a magnetic dipole shield to make sure that Mars has some sort of shielding system, or biotech, open cities, bioengineered plants, bioengineered cyanobacteria for the oceans, creating lichen, etc. Military, it doesn't really matter. Extracting carbonate from over there, thermal plants, factory upgrades, fusion plants. All of this stuff is definitely based within real science, and it does feel pretty hard in terms of science. The fact that I managed to get to this point in 42 years is a little bit awkward, considering Terraforming Mars would be a multi-century project, but still. But yeah, overall, with the technology, it's all pretty well and good. The real problem is that there's just not a lot of technology there, and there's no... Your choices in the end don't really matter, except for 3 choices that you make which change the ending, at least as far as I know, because I couldn't finish the game because, well, I managed to run into that issue where the enemy would continuously spawn everything, and then I was focused on trying to get that sorted out, and then all of a sudden the Martian servers that turned into basically the surface of Venus. It was pretty toasty out there. But yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff here that is just a little bit shallow, and that is really disappointing. The tutorial, like I said, could use more work. The story is entertaining, it's fun, it's well voiced, but in the end, Aspera is very much more of a interactive audiobook than a colonization / city builder on another planet. I hope you've enjoyed this video for Aspera. The game is available for $29.99. Of course, there's also a deluxe version where you can buy the soundtrack, which is okay, as well as the audiobook that goes with it. I haven't listened to it yet, but I will most likely do that shortly. But still, Aspera, for some reason, a lot of media outlets really like it. I see a lot of problems here, many problems here, but also a lot of promise. And with a little bit of work, and a little bit more time in the oven, this game could have been really good. Sadly, it is not. Whether or not you want to buy it, that's up to you. If you want to spend your time around the Christmas holidays or something along those lines playing this game, there's quite a lot of story here, but if you really want to have the whole experience of this game, get the audiobook, because the gameplay itself currently has too many problems. I hope you enjoyed this particular video. I'm going to start to do a couple more reviews in the future as well about sci-fi games in general. If you like that sort of thing, feel free to give it a like. If we get likes and comments, then of course we get more videos. That's how that works. You know, I look at the metrics. I know what you guys like, and the more votes, and you know, the more stuff I do in that general direction. But still, though, it's I'm really looking forward to this. I will be doing a review for several games, including Alpha Centauri, and of course, eventually Stellaris as well. Whilst, of course, not having the issue with some of the other videos that are coming out as well. In the meantime, though, I'm going to go and wrap this up here. As I mentioned, Aspera is available on your distribution platform of choice for $29.99 and your local equivalent. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons. And until next time, take good care of yourselves. And as always, gaze upon the beautiful carmine surface of Mars.